blah, blah, blah. Jesus names a whole bunch of stuff. And then he says, all of these are the beginnings of sorrows. That's right. The beginnings of sorrows. We are not in the tribulation. We are not. He was trying not to even look at me. He's got his head down.
I was like, where is it?
All of these are the beginnings of sorrows. We're not in the tribulation period. Peter, you're next. We're not in the tribulation period. I'm giving you guys a heads up so you can be prepared, right? Not in the tribulation period. We're at the beginnings of sorrows. And Jesus says in verse 14, whoever makes it to the end, right? He's like, the gospel of the kingdom will be preached to all the world as a witness of all nations, and then shall the end come. Right before that in verse 13, whoever will endure to the end. To the end of what, Peter? Peter's mouthing sorrows, I can tell. That's right. To the end of the time of sorrows. Whoever makes it to the end of the time of sorrows will be saved, right? So we got to keep going. Sorrows are not tribulation. Sorrows are part of the tribulation period. They're the very beginning of it, and then it gets worse. But right before it starts to kick up, we have verse 15 that says, when you therefore see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing or placed in the holy place, then, if you're on the top of your roof, don't come down into your house to take anything out. Get away. If you're out in the field, don't go back in the city. Wherever you're at, flee if you're in Judea, right? Jesus gives us this. And we were talking about how that couldn't happen any other time in the history of this world unless it had to be sometime after 1953. And really, most likely, I would say any time after 2010, to be truthful. By the time you figure out the Wi-Fi and the ability to do cell service everywhere, all the blah, blah, blahs, right? So we are the generation that sees this come to pass. But the point of the matter is this. Jesus told us to watch for the Antichrist. Jesus did not say, when you see me, then you know the next thing that's going to happen. He said, when you see the Antichrist, the beast man, when you see him, you're going to know what's going to happen. And it's going to happen so quick, it's going to make your head spin. So you better have a plan in place so that when you see it happen, you know what to do. Because you're not going to have time to think about it. Be prepared. Be prepared. Everybody say be prepared. Be prepared. Everybody online say be prepared. Okay, you're on mute, but I see your lips moving. So, what we're getting ready to walk into is Jesus' response to that topic of be prepared. We talked through from verses 16. We talked about 16 all the way to 28, and we ended in verse 28. We said where the carcass is. There the eagles will be gathered together, and we talked about how that word that eagles don't eat dead things, they only eat live things, right? When you look at the Greek, it really suggests that word is more of an eagle vulture than it is an eagle itself, like we would know an eagle of the United States, right? And one of the things that we brought up, or that I brought up, is that verse 28 is really the first sign that we have from Jesus that there is a great death experience associated to his return. So we're going to see this carried out in numerous other places in Scripture. This isn't the only place that talks about a death experience, a massive death experience, a global death experience that happens. As a matter of fact, I've been studying the Day of the Lord Scriptures. I've been going through and chronicling the Day of the Lord Scriptures and making observations on attributes and events that have to do with the Day of the Lord Scriptures. I've gone through I think 16 or 17 of the Scriptures. I have 322 different attributes and events associated to the Day of the Lord from the Scriptures that talk about it. 322. And when you see this list, what you're going to see is death, 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 judgment, 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 fire, 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 fire. You're going to see over and over and over again when Scripture talks about the Day of the Lord, there is death, judgment, and fire all over the place. Matter of fact, in one of the Scriptures, I think it's in Zephaniah, it says that the slain of the Lord are so great, it'll be like poop on the ground. We use the word dung, but you get the idea. So it's going to be so common. It's going to be like walking through through a pasture and having to step over cow patties. That's how it's going to be. So this is where Jesus is talking, and he says At the coming of the Son of Man, verse 27, for as lightning comes out of the east and shines even to the west, so will be coming of the Son of Man, for where the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered together. I specifically addressed the idea of Jesus and the church, of that being the rapture, because there are some people who believe that Scripture says, well, gosh, where the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered together. The eagle is a noble bird. Christians are noble. The carcass, Jesus died on the cross. This is a symbol of Jesus gathering the church to him, and that couldn't be further from the truth. There's no place in Scripture that ever identifies Jesus with a carcass. There's no place in Scripture that ever identifies the church with an eagle. So we can't use that as the only way that you could ever interpret that Scripture to be Jesus and the rapture of the church is just purely because you want to believe that. There's not anything that I've been able to find to disprove that. And I've tried. So if you can disprove it, then bring your Scripture to me and show me, because I can always be moved by a compelling argument. But it has to be scripturally based. So, immediately after the tribulation of those days, verse 29, immediately after the tribulation of those days, at the very end of the tribulation, immediately after, right? After is not before, after is not during, after is after. After the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give her light, the stars will fall from the heavens, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken, and then will appear the sign of the Son of Man coming in heaven with clouds, right? And I shared with you the difference between the sign of the coming of the Son of Man and the coming of the Son of Man, because they're two different things. We can't believe that the sign of the coming of the Son is the same thing as the coming of the Son. So, just to refresh your memories, the sign of the coming has these attributes, according to Matthew 24, verses 30 and 31. The sign of Jesus is in the clouds. All the tribes of the earth mourn for fear of his wrath. Only the elect saints are gathered. Jesus is seen coming alone. Angels have a task to fulfill, specifically gathering the elect from the winds of heaven. There's a great sound of a trumpet that heralds judgment. A great sound of a trumpet that heralds the event, and there is no judgment listed. So in Matthew 24, verses 30 to 31, that's what the sign of the coming of the Son of Man is. But when you compare that to the coming of the Son of Man, which we're going to read about here in just a minute, which is in Matthew 25, here are the elements of the coming of the Son. Jesus does not come on a cloud, he comes on a horse. Jesus ascends the throne as king to execute judgment and wrath. All the nations are gathered before him. Jesus is seen with his envoy. No tasks are given to the angels that are present. There is no defining sound listed, and final judgment is specific. So the coming of the Son of Man is not the actual, or the sign of the coming of the Son is not the same thing as the coming when you look at the Scripture. They're two different things. So when we're reading here, and we see in verse 31, verse 30 and 31, it says, "Then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven." At the end of the tribulation period, you're going to have the sun, the moon, and the stars are going to go dark. There's going to be the powers of heaven are going to be shaken. And then, verse 30, will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. Then will the tribes of the earth mourn, when they see the Son of Man coming in clouds of heaven with power and great glory. He'll send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet. They shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. That's at the sign of his coming. And we'll talk about this here in just a minute, in a little bit more detail. Matter of fact, let's just talk about it now. In the Scripture, we have an account of Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration. And if you recall, Jesus is with Peter, James, and John. He's up on top of the mount. He steps a ways away from them, and Elijah and Moses appear, and they begin talking with Jesus. And Peter, James, and John are seeing this. It's otherworldly. The Scripture says that Jesus' clothing was transfigured, and it's the reason why it's called the Mount of Transfiguration. Jesus' clothing was transfigured. It was brilliantly white. It was just this whiteness that you can't get with bleach, right? Brilliantly white. And they see Jesus talking with Moses and Elijah. And at some point, that ends,